Warning: the following video contains explicit language, which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Science fiction, the great teacher, the great inspiration. It helps us see the endless possibilities of life. So let's be inspired together.
Come with me if you want to live.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We are not sending out interceptors. We have taken them completely by surprise.
Hey everybody, welcome to Trucker Critique. I'm your host, Commodore Jeff. Hope everybody's having a good day. Really nice in Maine today, sunny, warm. But it looks like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are going to be very hot, in the 90s. So it's another heat wave. We usually have two big heat waves in the summer before we go into fall. So I think this is going to be our second heat wave for the next 3 days. So that's what goes on around here. So anyway, I want to talk about an older movie. I say old because this movie was released in 1979. It was called A Black Hole. It was made by Disney at the time. It had a production budget of $20 million. Plus they spent another $6 million on advertising, so they had $26 million total here for this film, which back then was a big fucking sum, you know. Today they probably spend $20 million on the goddamn advertising alone. You know, it was, you know, like I said, the most expensive picture that was ever produced by Disney at that point. And I had read somewhere where they wanted to have Industrial Light and Magic do the special effects for the film, but they were unavailable to help Disney with that project. I guess probably because they were working on Star Wars at the time, The Empire Strikes Back, I think. And so Disney was left having to deal with these special effects for the movie on their own. They had to, you know, basically try and make it as good as they could by using some older style effects with some new creations of things that they had come up with. After the movie was released, it only made about $35.8 million domestically, which was a disappointment for Disney because, like I said, they spent $26 million on it, and they you know, it didn't get very good reviews. And I think, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but I think because of the impact of Star Wars, the first movie, A New Hope, everybody's appetite for science fiction was kind of going in that direction because Star Trek the Motion Picture had come out after Star Wars and it didn't do well. But I'm thinking that if Star Wars didn't come out until like the 80s or something like that, these two movies, these two films probably would have done a whole lot better because that was traditional science fiction at the time. Okay, and what I mean by traditional was that before these movies, science fiction came in the form of The Twilight Zone and the original Star Trek and Lost in Space. And those kind of shows did not focus on shoot 'em up, you know, lightsabers and stuff like that. It wasn't just action. There was stories there, comments on, you know, society, basically. They were thought-provoking stories. So when Star Wars come out, it was basically about action, you know, a boy fulfilling his destiny to become a Jedi. It was all about, Darth Vader and the Empire and the small guy taking on the big giant entity. Okay, that became what science fiction was supposed to be after that. And if you look after Star Wars and you look at the preceding science fiction movies after that, it was all action-oriented stuff. Okay, things like Star Trek: The Motion Picture, The Black Hole. Okay, those things just people weren't getting their fill with that kind of science fiction, which is the more traditional kind. But looking back on it today, a lot of people have come to realize that these films were actually very good. We just didn't take the time to really watch them and understand it. There were messages there, there were commentaries there, and the action came in the form of drama, and so it did make things difficult for people trying to start their own kind of science fiction franchise, I guess you want, or just in film, because everybody was spoiled by the glitz and glamour and action of Star Wars. Okay, and so I'm thinking like Battlestar Galactica started on television after Star Wars. Okay, and it wasn't essentially the same thing, and it only lasted one season, but I think it was because the budget was too much for it. It would just cost too much money to make these things. But people were looking to that as science fiction. So anyway, to go back to the Black Hole had a story, and yes, there was some action in it, but the story really wasn't about anything about shooting up robots and shit like that. The story was about a crazy scientist who has an obsession with a natural phenomena that's in our galaxy, which is black holes, but he finds this one and he becomes enamored with it, obsessed with it, to the point where he actually wants to go into it. And that's where we find this guy at the start of the film. Okay, this other ship from Earth finds this other larger vessel that's been missing for 20 years, and they find the scientists on there, and he seems to be all alone except for some robots that he's got on the ship, and he tells them this story of woe. They had an outer space catastrophe with asteroids, and the crew all fled the ship except for him. He stayed behind and made robots so he could pilot his ship, and come to find out, that his story wasn't adding up in the minds of the visiting crew, and because of the cleverness of a couple of robots, cute little robots, called Vincent and old Bob, I guess. These robots, come together and they tell what really happened on that ship before they found it. That this Dr. Reinhardt, the guy that's running the ship, actually subdued the crew of his ship and brainwashed them with using some kind of machine to take away their sense of free will, I guess, and they became subservient zombies to this crazy scientist who's running the ship. And so, this tragedy unfolds that, these people tried to fight back while Reinhardt had robots fighting against them. And it certainly would have been an interesting prequel story to the story that eventually, the Black Hole, because it would have shown what happened, because this ship was large enough it could have had 200 to 300 people crewed on board. So for this guy to somehow subdue the entire crew, there had to have been one hell of a fight on that ship between all the people. And for him to take the ones that survived the fighting and then brainwash them, and so their way, that's kind of horrific. It's sort of like, Adolf Hitler kind of shit, So this guy, like I said, so obsessed with this black hole, he didn't want to leave it behind. He wanted to stay there and study it. And I guess the crew didn't want to stay there. They figured, you know, this guy's losing his fucking mind. We need to get the fuck out of here. Okay, anyway, like I said, so anyway, the crew, a lot of the human crew are still on the ship. They're just cloaked, and they wear masks. They look artificial. They make them look like robots, but they're not robots. If you take the mask off, you'll see the human face underneath. You know. And so the crew, the visiting crew, finally piece it together that, yes, he's been lying to you the whole fucking time you guys have been there listening to him talk about what happened. No, you know, he strong-armed the crew into submission and made sure they stayed submissive to him and kept them, you know, doing their jobs against their will. Of course, now they have no will. And he made this giant robot overseer to make sure everybody complies, and if they don't, they're killed. Okay, so in other words, they're there under duress. And you know, then you find out just how dark this fucking guy is, you know, and then you find out just how obsessed he is with that thing. You know, it kind of goes into that saying, when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. And I think that's kind of one of the things that movie was saying, is this guy was so obsessed with the black hole, it fucked his head up, you know. You know, he started creating things about the black hole that weren't natural. It's just a phenomenon in space. It's not one. There's all kinds of black holes, but he became obsessed with this one, you know. And to the point where he thinks that if you go into this thing, you're going to enter the mind of God, and you're going to have all the knowledge that God has. Which kind of goes back to the book of Genesis, you know, where the apple, remember, don't eat from this tree, don't eat of it, because if you do, I'm going to fuck you up, basically. And then Eve goes and bites into the apple because a fucking snake in the tree. You know what I'm talking about, okay? It's kind of like that. It's like the black hole is the apple, and he wants to take a bite out of it so he can have all the knowledge of God. Okay? And that was as tempting to him as shit is to a fly. And he wanted to go into that thing. He wanted to go into that because he was sure of it. He was sure of it, that if he goes in there, he would know everything. Well, his argument was so hypnotic, I guess, that one of the visiting crew members, who was also a scientist, gets sucked into that and starts to believe this guy. Okay, which, you know, what are they trying to say? That, you know, scientists are easily influenced by amazing thing? I mean, I don't know what that was saying, but somehow, you know, I have to think that even a scientist at some point has to come to a point and say, well, there's certain things that we're just never going to know because it's too risky. You know, you're talking about risking life and limb on the possibility that you're going to benefit something out of it, but who's going to be alive to tell what we've, you know? But for some reason, and this other scientist was played by Anthony Perkins, you know, from, you know, Norman Bates, Psycho. Okay, he played this other scientist, and you know, all the actors in this film were very good actors. They all had a litany of films that they had been in that were successes. And it seemed like, you know, this movie should have done better than it did, with considering you know, how many people were in it. I mean, you had Maximilian Schell, who was playing the crazy scientist, Robert Forster, who was the captain of the visiting ship, Joseph Bottoms, who was the first officer, Yvette Minois, who was the doctor, I guess, or, you know, doctor, Anthony Perkins, a scientist, and Ernest Borgnine was a journalist for a newspaper, which was kind of an odd character to have, but still a very good actor. Okay, so the story, like I said, you know, it shows exactly, you know, the end result of all after 20 years being in space on the Cygnus there, which is the name of the ship that they find with Dr. Reinhardt, you know, mad scientist. It shows, you know, the end result of what went on that ship, but they had to find out, sort of like a mystery kind of thing, leading up to them trying to escape back on the ship, which eventually, you know, when they find out what really went on and they try to escape, that's Dr. Reinhardt figures out that they know what happened, and he wants to kill them, stop them from actually leaving the ship. So that's where the big fighting comes in after that, is when they find us, because he sends his robot army to go after the visiting crew to kill them. So you end up with your traditional sci-fi action kind of stuff that takes place in there. And I have to say that, you know, it was interesting to see, because it didn't shake down in the way you would think, where they escape the ship and leave and, you know, that's it. No, while they're fighting, the ship itself is moving into the black hole. The Doctor just can't wait. He's pushing the ship into the hole. So it becomes a race against the clock. They got to hurry up and get off of that ship before they get too close to the black hole. Otherwise, there's no way they can escape the gravity field of this collapser in space, okay? So they got to hurry up and get the hell out of there. Okay, so they're fighting the robots. They're racing against time. And by the time they get to their ship, Reinhardt had destroyed it. So they had to find another way off the ship. So they had to backtrack where they came to go to a probe ship that sits inside the larger vessel, and they had to try to escape in that. But by the time they get to it, the ship is horribly damaged. I mean, not the probe ship, but the rest of the ship is horribly damaged from, you know, the shit that the black hole does. Twisted it, and, you know, beat the hell out of it with rocks that it was pulling in. You know, it was a mess. The fucking ship was a mess. So it was unable to complete, you know, Reinhardt's programmed trajectory of slingshotting through the black hole. Okay, now as we know today, you can't see a black hole in the way they depict it in this movie. You're not going to see it as a big swirling colors. Okay, black holes don't look like that. Okay. B, black holes don't have an exit aperture. They simply have a funnel with no opening. So everything in the end is simply crushed to subatomic particles. There's no drain at the other side. Okay, but in this film, because at the time we didn't know a whole lot, I guess, about black holes like we do today, but back then they made it seem like that you can go into one and get shot out the other side wherever it goes, and you know. But we have a different word for that today. We call those wormholes. Okay, where you get pulled in on one side and you're pushed out on the other end, and they call the other end a white hole. Okay, it's where everything is spit out. That's a wormhole. Okay, so in the end, instead of calling this movie the black hole, they should call it the wormhole, because that's basically what this is. All right, so anyway, like I said, the ship gets pulled into this collapser here, or this wormhole, if we want to call it that, and it's damaged beyond repair. And so the probe ship has some of the survivors of the visiting crew, because they lose 2 of them and one of the cutesy robots here. So there's only 4 left from the visiting crew that make it to the probe ship. And when they launch it, the thing was already pre-programmed to go through the black hole originally, so they're stuck on this thing and they have to go through it with, you know, after everything they had done, they still end up having to go through the fucking hole, which they do. And during that sequence of showing what, them going through it, we see what happens to the soul of the mad scientist, who ends up locked up inside a shell of his head robot that was running the crew. It's sort of like an Iron Maiden being locked inside of an Iron Maiden, and he's like in hell, basically, where he spends eternity, in a image of hell. Okay, which deals with the metaphysical, which is something that Disney had never done before. It was very unprecedented for a film to go into that kind of area in science fiction, to actually go into the religious interpretation of the afterlife for those who do bad. Okay, which a lot of people were very disturbed at seeing. Okay, even to this day, people who saw that film, they talk about that particular scene in the movie, and they think, Christ, I had nightmares of that when I was a kid, and to this day I still think about that, and it was really disturbing. I mean, Gary Nelson, who directed a lot of fucking films, the guy was no amateur filmer. Okay, he directed this thing, and he put effort into that film he never did in other films. He really went the distance with this film. When some people call The Black Hole a schizophrenic movie, because you have these moments of action science fiction, traditional science fiction, and then you have these moments of this contemplation of what's out there, and religion mixed in with it, and stuff like that. So it really tap dance on both sides of the line there when it comes to that, which some people said that was its downside and what caused the film not to do well. I don't think so. I think that it actually benefits the story, because the story was about a man who lost his fucking mind. Okay? Now, if you look at any other goddamn movie that's just horror-based film that loses his mind, okay, dealing with the metaphysical comes almost like par for the course. Okay, and look, Anthony Perkins, like I said, was in that film, and he played in Psycho. He was Norman Bates. Now, this is a guy, okay, who actually did essentially the same thing in the movies that he was in when he was playing Norman Bates. Okay, dealing with the metaphysical, and his mother, as it was, okay, who's dead, but he's sitting there talking to her like she's still alive, because in his mind, she is. Okay, so this guy, this Dr. Reinhardt here on the ship that he essentially hijacked from the crew, okay, his obsession is about that fucking spatial anomaly. Okay, and I think, like when I was saying about a prequel to that would have been neat, because it would have shown his degradation mentally, as to why the fuck did he come to this, understanding of that being something that goes into the mind of God? Where did, we don't get to see that reasoning. We just see the end result, but we don't see the build up to it that made him break mentally and turn on his own crew, his friends, in the way that he did. So I think, a prequel to that would have been an interesting story there, to see the decline of this guy, this man who was of science, who was noted before he left Earth as a what do they call him? A genius. He was a scientific genius, and see him essentially just fall into this pit of fucking, hallucinations or, mental decline. I mean, some lines in the movie were, well, he spent so many years out here alone without human contact, that, maybe that, but that was after the fact. That was after he took the ship over and turned the surviving crew into zombies. Yeah, he didn't have any contact with humans after that, because basically he turned the humans that were left on the ship into just, statues doing their job. They don't talk, they don't say a fucking thing. So he had no contact with anybody, is he took all that away. So yeah, I would say that after 20 years of what he had done, living with what he had done, and compounding with this delusion that he had about the black hole, you know, his mind was all fucked up by the time this visiting crew showed up and found his ship out there. So I mean, it was, you know, there's a lot to be said, you know, about that story, that you have to inject into it as you watch, because it doesn't tell you everything, okay? But the dialogue, the acting, essentially the acting, because without the good actors, they never would have been able to pull off that story, I think. But with the dialogue and the acting, you know, that right there gives you the story of what happened before and what probably happened to him after, you know, after he had done the deed there of taking over that ship. So yeah, anyway, the visiting crew at the end of the movie, they actually come out the other side of the black hole. That's where you kind of find out that it wasn't a black hole so much, it was a wormhole. And they survive, and they're basically spit out at some other part of the galaxy, and that's pretty much where the movie ends, leaving it up in the air as to what happens to these four, you know, these three people and a robot. Okay. I think a lot of people didn't like that kind of an ending, because the good guys are always supposed to win, right? You know, like in Star Wars, they kill the bad guy and everybody has a big celebration and they get medals. That didn't happen in this film. You got a pseudo good ending, but they didn't really win. I mean, they're more lost in space now than ever, and they, you know, there's no way they could ever get back home because they don't know where the hell they ended up. So they got to find some place, you know, to live, some planet somewhere that they can find to live on. Who knows, you know? So they leave the fate of these people, these survivors, up in the air, and a lot of people didn't like that, you know. Like I said, it just didn't go with the science fiction developments of the time, you know, because everything after Star Wars, the only things, even the lowest budget science fiction movie that had action in it still got recognition because there was action in it, you know. Like what was it, Battle Beyond the Stars with John Boy there, you know, in it, and some other like Robert Vaughn and George Peppard. Okay, I mean, they had some good actors in it, but it was a very low budget film. But it was still, people still enjoyed it because there was action in it, you know. And it came, it was a very B movie-ish kind of thing, very B movie-ish. So, but still, that was what they were looking for after Star Wars. Everybody wanted to make something like Star Wars because they knew that's where the money was. But with Star Trek: The Motion Picture and The Black Hole, they didn't do that, and both those films, they didn't really bring in the numbers, the money that they hoped they would bring in. I mean, yeah, Star Trek: The Motion Picture did better than The Black Hole, okay, but only because Star Trek was already established in American television history, and it was a build-up for a decade where there wasn't anything new for Star Trek coming out until that movie. So yeah, it had more notoriety before, you know, it hit the big screen. So they had that advantage. But when they got the story and they saw it, people were like, it was kind of boring. It was snooze fest, you know. But now we appreciate it more today now than we did back then. Okay, we see it now that, hey, you know what? It was more to that fucking movie than just talk and all that. There was actually a story being told, and we didn't hear it because we wanted to see them take their phasers out and shoot and kill everybody. You know, you know. But the Black Hole was a complete original thing. Okay, and it had been in development for quite a while. It was in development even before Star Wars was made in the motion picture. They started working on, because remember during the 70s there were a lot of these disaster films like The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure, Earthquake. Remember those films? Okay, where all the things are always, you know, okay. Well, somebody thought of the idea of doing one of these kind of disaster films, but have it take place in outer space. And I think the original name for the story was called Space Probe 1. and they had gone through a lot of rewrites. Some people passed away in the development process, and everything got put on hold for, you know, and it just went on for years. I think it started in like 74 or 75. They started working on this movie, but it went through so many revisions over time that what they ended up with in The Black Hole was a lot different than what they started with. Okay, so when I think the push that got it back in the forefront for Disney to make it into a movie was when Star Wars came out. Then they said, we got to get this fucking thing out now. Okay, because everybody's into science fiction now, and this is the time we got to get this story out. So they took what they had and they worked with that. Okay, now what they hadn't really been worked on a lot, but they were doing some screen revisions while they were filming. So it like they did with Star Trek the Motion Picture, they were doing a lot of fucking, you know, take this page out, put, you know, they were doing a lot of revisionist stuff while they were fucking making the film. Okay, they were doing about the same with this Disney film. Okay, so it's actually a damn miracle that this film got out in the way it did, and had good quality storytelling in it, which means they had some really good heads on their shoulders in the back doing this stuff. Okay, and so I can imagine that it wasn't an easy film to make, because there was a lot, I mean, there was a lot of things they had to do on the fly. They had to come up with special effects they had to do on their own because ILM wasn't available to help them with that. So, you know, Disney actually made some in filming techniques, made some first time ever done things in this film. So they did that, and they stayed in the budget that they had, and they managed to get it out there, but it, unfortunately, like I said, it didn't make the impact they hoped it would, because they wanted to make big money off of this thing. That's why they spent so much on it. They figure, oh, we're going to get all kinds of that money back because everybody's into science fiction now. It's like, yeah, but you didn't really pay attention to what got people's attention. It wasn't a story about morality or anything like that. It was a fucking story about killing and, you know, and a guy coming into his own, and, you know, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't that deep, the first Star Wars movie, okay? You know, I'm not saying this to shit on it, but Star Wars really wasn't that deep of a story, okay? You could easily follow this at any age. The Black Hole wasn't really for kids. If you see the movie, if you haven't seen it, and if you do see it, you're going to understand why. This movie was not made to entertain kids, even though it had lots of nice gadgets and these cutesy robots in it. It was like, how the hell can I say this? It's like putting R2-D2 and C-3PO into a movie like Psycho or something like that. It's like, yeah, we got cutesy robots, but we're dealing with this guy with a mad okay, you know what I'm saying? It was sort of like that. They did that because they hoped that the kids would come, but when the kids did come, they were traumatized by the fucking movie because of how it was played out. There wasn't anything likable for the kids to enjoy about it. It was scary. Okay, it was fucking scary for a little kid to see. So it was the first PG movie that Disney made. Okay, PG. That was big back then, being a PG movie. It's one step away from rated R, my God. Okay, so, but yeah, it was a PG movie. And the families, because it's Disney, they figure, oh, well, it'll be fun. Even the adults, some of the adults walked out of that theater thinking, oh my God, I can't get that out of my head. You know, it was that powerful how that all ended up. And where people think that is negative, no, I say, hey, that's good. If you come out of a fucking movie and your head is spinning around, okay, and it disturbs you, then God damn it, that's the movie. I mean, that's what Alfred Hitchcock liked for people to feel when they see his shit, okay, his movies. All right, he wanted them to come out of that theater traumatized. They wanted it to be an experience that like they were there, that actually happened to them. That's what he was always shooting for, which made him, you know, a notable director, you know. And Gary Nelson, who directed The Black Hole, he did just that. You know, and it's funny that, you know, Anthony Perkins would be in such a film, where Psycho was also a movie that left people like, oh, you know, kind of shocked and everything. So it was a very, very good film in that regard. Okay, so there was many things to admire about the movie The Black Hole that went right over the head of critics and some of the audience, you know. But this movie hasn't died. It's still around, and I've read over the last 15 years numerous times where they wanted to reboot this movie, remake it, not reboot it, just remake it. And every time they get to the point where, you know, they start talking money and stuff, and all of a sudden the interest ain't there anymore. They lose interest. Or some other bigger project like Jurassic Park starts up, or the Marvel movies start up, okay, and then everybody's focus is not really on science fiction and outer space stuff. It's about this, and you know what I'm saying. So every time they keep bringing up the idea of remaking this film, it ends up getting pushed back in the back burner. I would think that after all these years since that movie come out, why can't we just leave it as a standalone film? I mean, why do we have to remake it? Part of the artistry of that film comes from the era in which it was made in. To appreciate it's a part of film history. You know, in 1979, this is how we did a science fiction film. You know what I'm saying? Why remake it? I mean, the story was impactful enough. I mean, I just told you what it did to a lot of people that went to see it. What more do you think you can squeeze out of that story to make it any more impactful? I mean, I just don't see the point. I think at the time they had the perfect actors, they had perfect writers, they had the perfect everything to pull that story off. Okay, yeah, it didn't come out in the way they wanted it to, but it made an impact in a different way, and it's certainly worth remembering, along with movies like Psycho, like I keep saying, you know, and other films that came, you know, before it that made it big. You know, I don't see the point. Why should we remake it? You know, you can't. It's like somebody saying, I want to make a new painting of the Mona Lisa, make it better. You know, why? What's wrong with the one we have? You know, it's a piece of history. That film is a piece of cinematic history, and it shouldn't be revisited or remade because we think we can do it better. It was done as well as it could be made back then. With the budget that it had, they certainly covered as much as they could cover with that. You know, I mean, you take a look at the model of the Cygnus, the big, you know, big ship. That thing is gorgeous. I mean, it's the detail that went into building that model. And it ain't CGI, people. This was built by human hands. This big model, and it is huge. I mean, if you go online and look up that thing, and you're going to see how big that fucking thing was. Okay, it was huge. That model, you look at it, it would have taken years. You would think it would have taken years to build that thing, but they had all kinds of people working on it. Okay, had to make lights to the inside and all that stuff, and the detail, the fucking detail in that thing was like building an old cruise ship from like the Titanic time. Every little detail in that thing. Because when you see it on the big screen, and that movie should be seen on the big screen because the scope of it, all the wide angles and stuff, okay, it really pays off on a big screen. But when you see that thing on the big screen, it takes your breath away, especially when they pull back and the ship lights up. It's like, oh, you're like, holy fuck. It's an incredible model. Okay, an incredible model. And I can't give the people who built that thing enough credit. That's professional model building right there to do that. What they did, the detail in that. But yeah, I mean, it was, you know, the work they put into that film. The film itself is a piece of art, historical cinematic art. And you know, I can't see how anybody today could actually do that film justice, because, you know, they would be doing shortcuts with CGI, and you know, of course they'd have, you know, all the benefits of creating a computerized version of a Cygnus. Would look the same, but they would do that. And the robots, I'm sure they'd probably reinvent the look. But I like the way those robots looked. I can't see them making Maximilian and Vincent and Bob look different than what they did in that. I think, you know, that worked out really well. To make a, you know, a Maximilian that's different, I don't know. I just, it would be hard for me to accept that, you know. I don't know. But who the hell are they going to find to outdo Maximilian Schell, okay, as Dr. Reinhardt? You know, I don't see that. I can't see that would even be possible. And here's a little piece of film interest thing. Maximilian Schell and William Shatner actually starred in a movie together. Was based on the Nuremberg trials and stuff. It was a black and white movie. I saw it was on YouTube, and I was like, oh, that should be interesting. I mean, William Shatner's role in it wasn't that big. He was kind of just a major, you know, in a security thing like that. But, you know, he did have some lines in it. But seeing, you know, a younger Maximilian Schell in it, who really was, even then when he was younger, was a damn good actor. Yeah, thought it was interesting. I mean, you know, you see these names that you see in their later years, okay, and then you go back and you see them when they were younger, and you're like, oh yeah, that's, you know, I could see the talent and why they lasted as long as they did in cinema, you know. But yeah, I don't see them being able to make that movie today with the right actors in mind. I could be wrong. They could find, you know, one person that comes to mind that could play Dr. Reinhardt is Robert Downey Jr. maybe, if they could tone him down and make him more cerebral and, you know, and more, I don't know. I mean, he has the look to play that role, but I don't know if he could do it, you know, in that way. I mean, he surprised me with his Tony Stark, but I think that kind of role was meant for him anyway. But, you know, I think, you know, to play Dr. Reinhardt, you have to be a person who is broken mentally and always, you know, in that way, is really, you know, sort of hypnotic, sort of crazy, you know, not like crazy, like, you know, act like that, but someone who's like really a person that, you know, when he's looking at you, you could tell there's a million things going on in that guy's head, you know. And I think that's the kind of, you know, actor you need that can do that, you know. Anthony Hopkins, when he was younger, might have, you know, maybe not too younger, but like in his 50s or early 60s, he might have been able to play that role. You know, maybe. He's a good actor in himself, you know. He's been around, you know, for a long time too. But yeah, I mean, like I said, you know, there might be some actors that can do it, but the budget, the money they would want to play the roles would be a lot, and that's always a concern for movies, is how much is this guy going to want if we, you know. But yeah, I say, look, just leave it alone. Don't mess with it, okay? Just let that film stand out. You know, like a lot of films, you know, in the past that we never remade. We just left it. Okay, because they were fine as they were, and this should be fine as it is. You know, I think the movie says a lot of stuff in that movie that's being thrown at you to think about. And every time I watch that film, I see something else, you know, in it. About, you know, fate, about, you know, destiny, about what happens when you lose sight of your morals and your principles, and, you know, or, you know what I'm saying? There's so many things at play in that story, which is why it's hard to imagine that movie was so hard to get put together in the final aspects of it, because of the fact that there were so many rewrites to it. But certainly the work paid off, and I always appreciate that movie for being what it is. So, as a fan of science fiction in general, I can put that in a category by itself, being what it is. That it's still worthy science fiction. It may not be Star Wars, it may not be Star Trek, but it is worthy science fiction in its own right, and it deserves its place up there on the shelf. Okay, it really is one of Disney's great films. Okay, when they used to make good films. Okay, I'm not saying all the films they make today are shit. Okay, they've made some good films today. It just, you know, not like that. That movie was risky to make that kind of an ending for that film. They went there with it, okay? They certainly wouldn't have the balls to do that today with a film, okay? Not Disney. You know, they'd have left that to some other studio, might have went there with it, but Disney never would have done that today. But they did then, and that was noteworthy right there for that time. You know, goes to show how much they've changed over the years. So anyway, that's it. I just wanted to talk about the black hole, and I hope you enjoyed my interpretation of it and the opinions I've had of it. And if if you're interested in seeing it, if you ever see it somewhere where you could watch it for free or watch it, for a small rental fee or something, I think it's worth it, especially if you're into science fiction, where you like to have something to think about, something that stays with you. That's certainly worth a watch, okay? And if you don't like it, you could say you're a fucking asshole. You can come back here and tell me that. Okay? I'm just telling you, from my perspective, it was a good film, okay? But I hope you'll take the time to watch it, especially those of you that were born years after that. But it is a good film. It is a good film. So anyway, I'll see you guys another time, so take care, everybody.